Well, hello everyone, and you join us here today to talk about Breitling. Tom and I have spoken about Breitling in the past, and sometimes we thought, and sometimes we thought, And today we're going to expand that conversation to someone who can tell us what's really up. Hello, Sylvain. Who are you and what are you doing here?
Hi, Andrew. Hi, Tom. Thank you for having me. My name is Sylvain Berneron, and I have the privilege to be the creative director for Breitling.
That's a serious job, Tom. I don't think we've ever spoken to someone with quite such a serious job, so I suppose we'll probably be on our best behaviour. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, the weight of responsibility.
Well, the first one I could say is that it sounds a lot more serious than it is. My job is actually to be seriously unserious in order to remain creative.
Sure.
Well, in my experience in the watch industry, those two things are usually at the polar opposite ends of the scale. What I'm very interested to talk to you about, Sylvain, is how Breitling, which used to be a brand that I thought, boring, that's for dads, is now something that I routinely think, hang on a minute, I like this watch. Is that something you've had a handle in?
Some of it, of course. I have the chance to be surrounded by an extremely talented team of creative designers and CGI artists. I joined the brand late 2018, so we could say our design team is responsible for most of what we call the new era of Breitling under the management of George Cairns. Yeah.
So I'm going to go through a list of watches that I've seen recently from Breitling that I really like, and I want you to tell me if that's something that you've had involvement with. Super Ocean Heritage 57.
Yes, we did entirely.
The recent Premiere collection
as well,
including the pistachio dial.
Sure.
The brand new Super Ocean, the more modern looking one.
Yes.
I think I'm getting a trend here.
The Endurance Pro?
Yes, sure. Endurance Pro and Chronomat were the two big milestones we achieved when we arrived from Breitling. Cool. We had on one hand reviving the Chronomat, so that was about taking off the layer of dust of the brand's heritage. And Endurance was more about building a new collection completely in line with the consuming habits of the 21st century. So we've built that from scratch entirely.
And I guess I don't need to ask you the recent Navitimer update as well.
Yes, sure.
What is Breitlight, by the way? Tom and I were talking about this the other day and we can't figure out what it actually is.
Yeah. So Breitlight dates from the era where Breitling was still owned by the Schneider family. Mm-hmm. Their strategy was instruments for professionals back then. So they had deep roots into aviation, civil aviation, but also professional aviation. So aeronautical pieces. And so they went to a special company and they custom ordered a material with a set of rules, among which Breitlight is extremely light. It's lighter than carbon. It is stronger than titanium. The material is hard enough not to be scratched up to 1,000 Vkerts. So it's actually 5 times more resistant to scratches compared to steel, all being lighter and stronger resistance to shocks. So this material in terms of pure performance is extremely impressive. It's not the most fancy material from the outside, but this is not what it has been developed for. So as a result, we have a material that is extremely modern, complex to produce, that I have to say, more than steel. Technically speaking, it's called loaded carbon composite. So that means you have the waved carbons that you can see, for example, on cars and F1 chassis and stuff like this. So where the carbon is weaved, here it's a carbon where the fibers are actually compressed. They are not weaved, but they are compressed together. And then you have the resin that actually packs it all together. But it's a very high-grade aeronautical material.
Like a forged carbon fibre. Oh, cool. So, Sylvain, it seems clear that the recent era of Breitling that both Tom and I have had our attention turned by has been really created by you and your team. Breitling is an incredibly old brand and has been, I would say, a little bit lost for a really long time. How do you just wander in and change stuff to such a degree? What's the secret sauce that you have?
Well, when I first joined, George clearly explained me what was his strategy and what was his goal. He wanted to revamp the brand, bring it in the 21st century. So first, we did an assessment of what was Breitling. We clearly had two generations. The first one was the Breitling owned by the three generation of Breitling, Léon, Gaston, and Willy Breitling. In this era, you could find all the more dressier pieces like the Premier and the Chronomats back then, the Navitimers. These come from the Breitling era. Then the company changed his management after the quartz crisis and became Schneider owned. Under that generation came all the aviation pieces like the aerospace, the emergency, the exospace. They turned the Chronomat into a more modern, rugged piece. Same for the Avenger. It's not my favorite era of Breitling, but I have to admit they really saved the brand. Back then, Breitling would have died otherwise. And they were able to turn the brand into a direction that was relevant in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Now we are, I would say, the third big chapter for Breitling, and what we want is to bring these two eras together and keep only the best of the two, to have a more casual yet modern vision of what we call modern luxury. So this is in the big lines what we try to achieve. And design-wise, the goal was to unpack Breitling's heritage. As a designer, it was strictly impossible for me to learn almost 140 years of history overnight. So I quickly asked for help, and I found extremely precious helps with Fred Mandelbaum. He's the most knowledgeable Breitling collector on earth. And we exchange on a daily basis, and he's the one who helps me to understand and points at me the right things I have to consider and I have to know in order to produce modern design works that make sense within the history, within the scope of the brand. Because the biggest mistake, I believe, for a designer is to try to pour your own taste, your own personal taste over a brand, because this is not what we are here for. We are here to serve the best brand's interest, and therefore we have to understand and respect it at first.
For a pleb like me, I look at the pieces that you have been involved with, and I look at the pieces that you haven't, and it generally seems like inadvertently I can tell the difference. I can pick the ones that you've worked on out of a lineup. I can't explain why that is. I can't explain what it is about the pieces that you have designed and your team has designed that make them better. Perhaps you can. Perhaps you can explain some of the ingredients that go into making a watch just look great.
Good work comes with a strong design team. There is no secret. A strong creative team. And this is hard to achieve, to have the right chemistry in a creative team. And I mean, I have little experience as a design manager still. I'm just in for 5 years. But what I start to realize is the most important, I believe, is the frame of work. Usually people tend to believe that being a creative is a God-given ability. Truth is, it's absolutely not. Drawing, I think, just like playing music or you guys creating content or being an athlete, is about putting the hours. There is no secret. So I actually built a design team from scratch. When I arrived, I was the only designer at Breitling. And we built a team of 10 people from scratch. Right now we are 10 people. And my goal was to hire strong creatives. A strong creative is someone who has the culture, who has the hard skills. So by that, I mean good drawing skills and good technical knowledge. Being a watch designer requires a very wide palette of knowledge in order to be able to build these pieces. It goes from CNC machining, stamping, injection molding, laser, stone setting, galvanic treatments. I mean, the palette is very wide. So you need to know that before you can draw anything relevant. But what I look at the most is what I call the art of showing up. You need someone who is able to have the discipline to draw countless hours on a daily basis and on a stable level. for years. This is to me the secret of, on the long run, being able to bring strong creative input for a brand to build a new chapter. And my role is then to give them the right frame for it. Because if you throw a designer in endless meetings and travels and he has to go here and there and blah, 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 there is no way he can create. A good creative day usually is spending 6 out of 8 hours on the drawing board with no emails, no calendar, no phone calls. I make sure my team is not too disturbed on a daily basis so that they can do what we expect them to. And I think at the end, this good frame and these good people all together bring basically what we could describe as, you can feel when a product has been crafted with love. I think this is what it comes down to. To your initial question, you can feel when some real love went into it, and this is what it takes. And I think ultimately the final client feels this has been done with true love.
You're right. There's a tangible sense that you can tell that the person who worked on it enjoyed working on it, rather than turning up, doing something that they were told to do and then going home miserable. You mentioned that when you joined Breitling that there were no designers. Do you mean that in the sense that there wasn't anyone who was particularly good at designing, or were there no designers?
The previous era of Breitling under the Schneiders was still what we call an activity of établissage in French, we say. And by that, I mean it's an administrative headquarters where production steps of making a watch are actually externalized. So as a result, at the headquarters of Breitling, under the Schneider era, you didn't have people able to construct a watch internally. This was done by the case supplier, and even the design was externalized. So they had a designer, quote unquote, but he was not a Breitling employee.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And under George's era, that is also part of his strategy in order to create more value for the brand, in order to have ownership of our creative DNA. He asked me and my colleagues to internalize not only the technical construction, but the product development and the design. So now the design team is fully on the Breitling payroll, and only Breitling employees get to design Breitling pieces. We do not design anything externally.
It's interesting. There's often a lot of talk about movements being developed in-house, but no one actually thinks about the design of the product being in-house. So I think that's quite interesting. One question I had was, talk about your designers and yourself wanting to be happy with what they're doing and loving their design. I wondered how much of that ties into creative freedom that you're given, especially when you're working with products that are very well established and well known and familiar to people. How confined are you when you're given the task of working on such iconic pieces? Do you find the limitations help, or do you actually just, go as far as you can and then show the designs to the executives and then they say, oh, that's good, but bring it back a bit? How do you find working in that environment?
So to answer the first part of your question, to have strong designers working not only for me, but for the brand, I have to give them freedom. Otherwise, they won't stay. So when I hired 5 years ago, Massimo and Pablo, these are my two best designers so far. The deal was very clear. I told them, look, I know Breitling is not sexy yet. I know Grenchen, for the record, Breitling is located in Grenchen. It's not the most sexiest part of Switzerland. I know these are two minor points, but on the other side, I will let you choose the collections you want to work on. I will give you carte blanche, so free choice of setup, and we will get to do almost as much home office as we want. And these are the three conditions that I'm willing to offer on top of the salary, of course, but this is not usually what turns creative into a job. To make sure that you can actually be fulfilled doing what you will be doing. And it worked well. So far, 5 years down the line, nobody has left the team yet. So but it's a good sign, usually when I'm quite personally happy to be able to see that, because it means that the frame that we've built all together seems to be working. And that's really the base of our model in order to bring strong creative input for Breitling. So that was the first part of the question. And the second, as we said before, Breitling has a long-lasting history. It's important that whatever we do next is in line with the brand tone of voice.
Yeah.
So depending on the projects, for example, when we do the new Navi timer, this is probably the project where it has to be the most about evolution and not revolution.
Yeah.
The product is iconic by itself. So there we usually present different levels of evolution, and the board gets to decide where they want to place the cursor and how disruptive, so to speak, they want to be with the next model.
Sure.
Then we have different projects. For example, the Endurance is a good example where we build something from scratch. And there we usually present what we call advanced design sketching, where we throw the creative ball as far as we can, and then we bring it back with retro engineering. So we check if that's technically feasible, and then the board as well decides how disruptive they want to be. So these are the two different type of design projects we get to work on.
Cool.
It sounds like you have a lot of creative freedom there. But everything you've said so far, it all sounds like really sensible stuff. Allowing designers to have the time to do the work, allowing them to have the environment in which they're going to be most productive. The crazy thing to me is that we often find, not just in the watch industry, but in the wider industry, that a lot of companies don't seem to understand what motivates people and gets the best out of them. Would you say, given that you've acknowledged that there's no natural ability that makes a creative person better than anyone else, would you say as much of that being sensible and having a modern approach to working is a really big, strong part of the success?
Yes, I believe and that's, we have this discussion very often with the team. I very often tell them, look, guys, I believe we are the next generation in big corporations, and it's actually up to us to decide under which rules we want to work. It's up to us to create a new model to show what could be the options. And for the record, even before COVID was actually a benediction, because now home office is widely acknowledged as being a new way of working. But even before COVID, most of my team was doing more than 50% home office. And I put my actions where my mouth is, because once again, it might sound quite unprofessional, but it's the reality. I'm the creative director of Breitling, and I show up to work only on Mondays every week. And I know
it's worked.
It sounds weird. And in the beginning, because I always worked like this most of the time, I even had colleagues from, let's say, the previous generation coming at me and telling me, with the job you have, how dare you to show up only one day per week? This is not a kindergarten. Yeah, it's not what is this way of working? It's not serious. And I told the guys, look, I'm not a commercial. I'm not a finance guy. I'm not an engineer. The company pays me to bring creative input on the table. And if I do that, even from the paradisiac island somewhere in the middle of the ocean, that's my business, As long as the creative input is there, and that's the most precious, and I don't care how it emerges, as long as it's good. And that's what I look at. I even have some guys, like, for the record, I have some guys sometimes drawing from Portugal, from Spain, for a week, because they are there and they have to share time with the family, and they figure out, hey, why not, instead of going just 1 week, how about I stay 2 weeks in Spain and I work 1 week from Spain? And I go, yes, sure. Please go ahead, be my guest.
Nice.
Better to work on a dive watch if you can actually see the sea, right?
Yeah.